Welcome. In this episode of the channel, Mystery Yomba, we will talk about one of the darkest pages in American history, whose terrifying history has created numerous legends and perhaps also many dark realities. We will talk about the Salem Witches. Salem is a town in Massachusetts, located in the northeast of the United States in Essex County in the Danvers region, not too far from the city of Boston. In the mid-1600s, Salem was a rural community made up of emigrants. And at the end of the century, the town experienced the bloodiest witch hunt in American history. A series of large-scale trials, torture and capital executions targeting people accused of witchcraft. This is not legend but history, and this story has inspired over the years numerous legends, books, TV series, movies, and perhaps awakened dark and supernatural presences linked to the true witchcraft of those years. Between the best-known works related to the tragic history of Salem, we find the book Salem's Lot, one of the very first books of the writer of horror novels Stephen King. Story that combines a series of crimes, vampirism, and the struggle for the survival of the protagonists. A novel that a few years later was transformed into a movie. The Salem story has inspired numerous other novels. We can quote Lois the Witch, The Scarlet Letter, novel 1850, The Daughters of Salem, I, Tituba Black Witch of Salem, The Lords of Salem, The Salem Witch Trials Reader, and many others. In 1995, the movie, The Scarlet Letter, was produced based on the novel of the same name by Nathaniel Hawthorne, based on the violence of the Puritans of that time. Movie that sees a very young Demi Moore as Hester, accused of adultery following the disappearance of her husband. In 2012, the witch trials of the town of Salem inspired the movie, The Lords of Salem, story of a curse launched by witches on the point of death at the stake that will manifest itself only centuries later in the same city, and sees as protagonist a woman, radio presenter of a local station, a reckless woman of the nightlife. And also movies like Hocus Pocus, Salem Virgins, The Crucible, and many others. In 2014, this story inspired a television series named Salem, a story that takes inspiration from historical events, in order to create a story linked to the war between Puritans and witches in a Salem tormented by misfortune and plague. The second half of the 1600s in the Salem region was a very difficult time for the population, characterized by a colony of emigrants without a government, tormented by an armed guerrilla between citizens of the colonies and Native Americans, invasions of locusts, repeated periods of drought that had destroyed the crops, causing misery and fame to a community whose survival was linked to agriculture. Also, in 1691 in Boston, a huge fire took place that destroyed almost the entire city. In this historical context, of uncertainty, of war, of misery and poverty, the discontent of the population begins to suspect the work of the devil as the author of these tragedies, and obviously of his followers, the witches. The outburst of the Massachusetts Society soon turned into a real witch hunt with the trials of 1692. Before 1692, already 17 people had already been subjected to the death penalty in the region for the crime of witchcraft, during a witch hunt which lasted from 1647 to 1688. But with the trials of 1692 and British New World possessions, the most extensive series of accusations began, arrests and executions. At the end of the trial, 19 people were hanged to death. One man was pressed to death for refusing to testify. 150 suspected individuals were imprisoned and another 200 people were accused of witchcraft. a very high number if compared to the fact that at the time the population of New England was only 100,000 people. It all began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris in the winter of 1691–92. Daughter Betty and niece Abigail began to behave in an unusual way. They had long periods of silence. They hid in the house, made incomprehensible speeches, strange gestures, and were sometimes seen crawling on the floor or into holes in the garden. The girls were seen by various doctors, but no one found a scientific explanation for the events, and the most convincing conclusion was that one of a diabolical possession, even if it was not a widespread custom to attribute strange behavior to a curse. At the beginning, the behavior of the young women was interpreted only as bizarre, and the Reverend decided not to turn to the authorities, but to seek advice from other pastors, hoping that the problem would resolve itself. The rumors of a curse in the Reverend's house did not take long to spread in the village, and even more strange other young people began to have the same bizarre behavior. The villagers began to fear a curse from the devil, and the search for truth began to become more insistent and aggressive. Rituals against the evil were made to free the girls and to understand the proportions of their possession or their association with the witchcraft. The young women were questioned, together with other girls who showed the same symptoms, in order to know the name of the person at the head of the group of witches and of the other members. Betty and Abigail accused a black slave named Tituba, slave in the service of the Parris house. But also the two girls were accused of witchcraft in the following days by other citizens of Salem. The first imprisonments began for the charge of witchcraft, and the slave Tituba under torture confessed to being a witch. But despite the incarceration of Tituba and other girls, the mass hysteria did not cease and the witch hunt continued. The interrogations and imprisonments continued to grow, including the relatives of the accused persons. The phenomenon began to have such proportions as to involve the entire colony of Massachusetts, and to require addition of other members of the court. Theodat Lawson, a former minister of the cult of Salem, went to the village to check the rumors that had spread throughout the country, and witnessed himself the strange behavior of Betty and Abigail while visiting Reverend Parris's house. During the trial, Abigail accuses also George Burroughs, ex-pastor of the village, to being a sorcerer, and that he cursed Salem and caused the mass hysteria. The former pastor was included into the interrogations of the court. Already in April, the prisons were full of suspects, and with the arrival of Governor Sir William Phips, sent by the Crown of England to preside over the trials, the first death sentences began. The first sentence to death by hanging was Bridget Bishop. She was hanged until her death in one hill in Salem, which today has the name of Witches' Hill. All people accused of witchcraft were sentenced to death in the days following the judgment, with the sole exception of pregnant women at the time of the verdict. The executions for them were postponed. Was also held the trial of George Burroughs, former pastor of Salem, accused of being the sorcerer who placed the curse on the village. He strongly defended himself in the court and ended by reciting the prayer, "Our Father." But he too was sentenced to death and hanged. An 80-year-old farmer, Giles Corey, not recognizing the authority of the court, had remained silent during his trial. He was subjected to torture, carried out by the nephew of Judge Jonathan Corwin. He was made to lie prone on the ground and heavy boulders were placed on his body, so as to press his chest and force him to speak. Corey continued his silence and was pressed until the death. The last death executions took place on the 22nd of September 1692. And while the chariot of the condemned was headed towards the gallows, a wheel slipped into a hole in the ground. The girls, believed to be victims of the curse, who witnessed the scene, shouted that the devil was trying to save his followers. No crops were harvested during the Salem witch trial, and the cattle were abandoned. The mills remained stationary, as the owners were missing, arrested, or present at the hearings of the trial for the pure pleasure of the show. Despite the executions, the phenomena did not cease, and the controversy over the methods of the trial began. First of all, that of some members of the Puritan Church of the colony, who pushed the Governor Phipps to stop the executions and the trials. In the following years, the accusations, the proofs, but above all the methods of investigation of this witch hunt were questioned by the religious authorities of Massachusetts. Inconsistent proofs selected considering dreams, visions, premonitions, testimonies of people who wanted to get away from the risk of being accused, or from confessions made under torture. But then, according to the reconstruction of the trial, what would be the truth, or rather the legends and popular beliefs on witches that led to the imprisonment and death of the witches of Salem? Reverend Parris had been in Barbados for a long time, and back from there with 2 slaves, John Indian and his wife Tituba. What the Reverend didn't know is that she knew Obeah, an ancient art of black magic from West Africa. Tituba, once at Parris's home, initiated the Reverend's daughter and niece into this magical art. The 2 young women, oppressed by the Puritan education found in the slave woman and in her stories, at first only in distraction, but then a faith to follow. Taking advantage of the Reverend's usual travels, the house soon became the destination of many women eager to hear about their own future. These people after that took their friends and waitresses with them until they gathered a considerable group of women. Tituba was an adept of the devil. She had made her agreement with him, in exchange for a better future and to be able to back to her homeland as a free woman. For this, Tituba had to enact the spell on Salem on behalf of the devil and in his battle against the Puritans. The slave witch, gathering as many women as possible, had to initiate them into the black arts and into devil worship. Those who would resist would be pursued by ghosts and demons, which happened punctually given the Puritan society regulations of the time. In any case, Tituba managed to gather all the devil worshippers of Salem, and it was the devil himself who gave the names to the slave. And among these was also that one of Bridget Bishop, the first witch sentenced to death by the trial, and that one of many other women of the damned village. Giles Corey, accomplice of his wife Martha, despite having kept silence throughout the trial and during the excruciating torture. Dying, he threw a curse on Salem and its generations to come. The sect of witches met punctually in the woods near the Reverend's house to pursue the volition of the devil, to carry out magical rites and sacrifices of beasts. In the same place was seen by several witnesses and several times also the former village shepherd Burris. Testimonies that cost him his life. In their rites, the devil worshippers bewitched domestic pets, making them drink the evil blood of witches in order to make them obey to their orders. The purpose of this ritual was mainly to kill the children of the families that the sect wanted to target. The witches felt that territory as their own, the devil's territory. The city itself was allegedly founded according to various legends by a sorcerer named Melas. That giving to the city its name backwards would have protected it from the benevolent forces of the religious. The witches also poisoned the village bread with a particular mold-based potion which, if ingested, gave hallucinogenic effects that served to amplify the visions of ghosts and demons, and which gave rise to mass hysteria. When the calamities that plagued the town increased and the phenomenon of witchcraft became too widespread to remain hidden, the witches were discovered, captured, tried and killed, and the city of Salem purified from the influence of the devil. But perhaps some witch managed to escape from the death sentence. Given the dark history of the place, the question is if it is more terrifying the historical reality of the trial or the legends related to this event. What is certain is that the history of Salem's witch trial has survived the centuries by multiplying the rumors and legends related to it, making Salem a cult place of witchcraft, and a tourist destination for millions of visitors passionate about the genre. Houses and places that have been the scene of the witch hunt have been recognized by experts in the paranormal as one of the most haunted places in the country, haunted by ghosts and evil entities. Among these places we can mention Hawthorne Hotel, the Wicked Good Books, where human remains have been found in its basement, the Salem Prison, the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, the Old Salem Cemetery, and the Witch's House, one of the oldest houses in Salem, which belonged to the judge of the witch trial Jonathan Corwin, a place of interrogation and maybe torture during the witch hunt, and now a museum. But we will talk about this in another episode. And we came to the conclusion of this video. I guess each of you has your own idea. Leave it in a comment and tell me, is the legend real? Give a like and subscribe to the channel. Mystery Omba. Other videos are coming soon. Don't forget to share these fascinating stories with friends. See you at the next mystery.